Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for coming out and braving the weather today. I'm Cherylyn Harley LeBon, and I'm the Discussion Group Fellow this fall. And as many of our returning guests know, the series is the elusive quest for the lacrosse mom. And why I've chosen the word lacrosse mom is because normally it's soccer mom, and I'm a lacrosse mom, so I decided to add that in. And so it's the elusive quest for the lacrosse mom and how organizations, candidates, and corporations can engage women at all these different levels. And so throughout the series, we've had a number of guests who've all spoken to various aspects of the series and how women can be engaged with nonprofit organizations and community groups. Last few weeks ago, we had guests that talked about sort of corporate engagement and how corporations can better engage women. And our guest today is going to talk about actually all of these different levels, how we engage women at the community level, at the political level, and of course, as well as at the community level, nonprofit, corporations, and political. So let's just kick it right off. Andrea Bottner is the founder of Bottner Strategies and is an expert in women's issues and works with advocacy groups, political organizations, and private sector clients. Andy served at the State Department as director for the Office of International Women's Issues. She helped shape foreign policy related to the political, economic, and social advancement of women worldwide. She also served at the Justice Department as the acting director of the Office on Violence Against Women. By the way, Andy will also let us know that this month is Violence Against Women's Month, so we're going to be talking about some of those issues. So at DOJ, she managed a budget of $400 million and a large staff of attorneys, grant specialists, and policy experts. She visited shelters, law enforcement agencies, and advocacy organizations across the country, assessing and addressing violence against women. Andy spearheaded a $15 million presidential initiative that established victim assistance centers across the U.S. Now, at the political level, Andy was also the Deputy Chief of Staff to the Republican National Committee Chairman, Ann Wagner, probably a name that you guys know since she represents the neighboring state, specializing in the committee's National Women's Outreach Expansion Strategy. She began her career on Capitol Hill, serving 2 members of the United States House of Representatives, focusing on criminal justice issues and social welfare policies. So, she just fits right along with this whole discussion series. Let's dig in first at the international level.
The easy topic first.
The easy topic first. You know, lots of stuff going on in the geopolitical climate. But let's give our audience a sense of what exactly your role entailed at the State Department.
Okay. Well, thank you, Cherylyn, and thank you, everybody, for being here, especially on a cold, rainy afternoon. It's a pleasure and an honor to be with you. And I just want to say it's been a real treat to spend the afternoon on campus and be so well informed and taken care of by the students here. Thank you, Mr. Lacey, for shepherding this very impressive institute. Again, as someone who's grown up in the Washington, D.C. area, to sit here and walk around these halls and learn more about Bob Dole, that's a real treat any day of the week. So thank you.
You're very welcome.
So where to begin?
Yes.
I was at the State Department. To back up a little bit, I was a political appointee, and so how that works for those who may not know, I was serving at the pleasure of George W. Bush. And because of my background, there was an opening at the International Women's Issues Office. And so the White House had called me and they said, would you go over to the State Department and do a lot of what you've done here domestically, but we're going to do it on the international stage. And I said, well, I'm not a foreign service officer. I've been abroad maybe twice in my life for pleasure. You know, I'm not a diplomat. And they basically said, well, you will be, and that's what we're going to do. And so I went over to the State Department very nervous, a little anxious, but it was by far one of the, if not the most rewarding jobs, positions in my life. We had a small office, but we basically had a very open portfolio. And so Secretary Rice had said to me, look, you know, the world is open. I want you to talk about gender issues. You have a background in issues like domestic violence, gender-based violence, so that would be a good place to start. But really, wherever you want to go, talk with your staff, and let's do some good here in the next couple years. So I like to think, with a very wonderful team that I had, we traveled the globe. We highlighted things like gender-based violence. I learned very much from the team there. We had some Foreign Service officers on staff, and those are folks who are very schooled in different issues and sometimes in different regions or countries in the world. So it was very important to have their voice and their expertise in the mix. And so it was a wonderful couple years. And I will say, we created the International Women of Courage Award, which was definitely the most rewarding thing I think that I've had the chance to do. And that was a way for the United States to pick women from around the world and basically highlight 6, 8, or 10 women and honor them for their courage in many different fields. And then we would bring them to Washington, and they would spend a week or two here in the United States. We would set up a program for them.
Right.
So I'd like to think it was a very moving and worthwhile experience for them, but we got so much out of it, being able to interact and work and learn from them. And I'm proud to say the program continues today. And that really is a mark of a good program, when it can start in a Republican administration, go through a Democratic administration, and just keep going. And, you know, it doesn't really matter what party the president is from.
So as you kind of look through that lens, Andy, of gender-based violence, can you pinpoint any particular region or countries that you can remember that sort of had more violence than others in terms of gender-based violence?
Well, I'm not, since I've been away, you know, for a few years from that position, I'm not going to go into any sort of, I don't have, you know, current by-country stats.
But while you were there.
But yes, I think what really sticks out with me, maybe I'll give an anecdote. In this country, it's been such a struggle. You know, many will say, you know, and still is, dealing with domestic violence, sexual assault issues. We've come a long way with things like the Violence Against Women Act, the reauthorization of violence against women, the shelter, the security that is in place for those that are seeking assistance. Coming from that domestic viewpoint at the Department of Justice, and then going over and meeting with people from different countries, it was remarkable how much more challenging the situation can be in other countries. I was at lunch with an African ambassador, and we were talking about access to education. And she stopped the lunch and she said to me, you know, in my country, and I'm not going to mention the country, but she said, in my country, access to education begins with our girls being able to get to the schoolhouse without being jumped, raped, or thrown over. And I thought, wow, you know, hearing how bad it is, but as an American who had spent years at Justice, you know, thinking about how to get more money to shelters and, you know, continue to enhance the infrastructure, to then talk to someone who said, you know, we wish we had a shelter. We can't get girls to school without them being attacked. So
following up with that, knowing that gender-based violence manifests itself in many different ways around the region, what were some of the other challenges you faced in your role at the State Department?
Well, you know what, the State Department, it is a wonderful place to learn. It's a place that makes you feel very proud. At least it made me feel very proud to represent our country. And when you're abroad, you know, and you're a diplomat and you're working at the State Department, you really are responsible for how the rest of the world views Americans. but there's a challenge in that because there's so many, it's not easy, it's not a uncomplicated situation to navigate.
And it's not an uncomplicated world.
No, it is not an uncomplicated world by any means. So for me, the challenges at state were really about just finding the right channels to try and do the most good that you could do, knowing as a political appointee, you know, my time was running out. You know, on the day of President Obama's inauguration, you know, my office was cleared out at 12:02. And so you know that you have a deadline, and so it's really about what could I do that is maybe non-political but long-lasting, and then how do I get people who are often not political, you know, and are there to serve as bureaucrats and international experts. Now, how can I get them on board, you know, behind this initiative? You know, build a team and really be accountable, make something stick.
And Andy, what were some of the initiatives, if you had more time, if the clock hadn't run out, and say, for example, if you had more resources and more time, what were some of those initiatives that you think you would have spent more time on?
Well, I think probably the first thing I probably would have liked to have done would be to, at some point, make sure that every country where we have an ambassador puts forward an International Woman of Courage nominee. Because when you start a program to get buy-in, you know, we would go out and we would say to everybody, you need to put forward a woman in your country, you know, into the mix. And you can never really mandate that. You know, the secretary can put pressure on, and we did, and we tried to really invite that participation. And, you know, we had good participation, but it wasn't 100%. So I would, if I could go back, I would want to expand and then maybe look at, in those countries where we've honored women, what could we do there that would carry on the legacy of that woman in her country?
Okay.
But you run out of time, and resources are often scarce.
And you hope that it's continuing on with the next administration and the administration after.
That's exactly right.
Let's pivot to Department of Justice, because I know we've got a number of students with a political background and perhaps criminal justice background, and those also interested in going to law school. So let's dig in there. You had a very large budget, $400 million. We want to know, what did you do with that money? Tell us about. Tell us about one of your more memorable programs.
The only one I will talk in detail about is the $15 million initiative. To be absolutely candid, the $400 million budget, you know, at the VAWA office, the Violence Against Women office, the director, the deputy director, we have very, very little wiggle room in how you would spend that money, because it's basically all grant money. And so it's all mandated by Congress, by law. You will give, you know, this many million to this state at this percentage level, and then it re-ups, you know, every year. So those were not political or discretionary decisions we had. As a political appointee, you sometimes do get lucky, you know, and the White House can say, we want to do a special pilot project, or we want to do an initiative, and we're going to carve out $15 million. So in that case, we had $15 million, and we decided to do what we called family justice centers, and it's basically co-located services for victims of domestic violence, sexual assault in a community with community buy-in. And when I say co-located services, that means medical personnel, law enforcement, shelter, psychiatrists, therapists, anybody who would address the problem of domestic violence or sexual assault would be at the table. And we basically had 15 different communities that competed against one another to be chosen. We picked 15 very different communities, and then each one got $1 million seed money. And it was basically my job to make sure that those 15 centers were working, were progressing, and then basically were opening. And, you know, we would go when they were ready to open. The political piece of it would be I would go out, Attorney General Gonzalez at the time joined me, I think actually in Missouri.
Oh.
And so it would be me, it would be the Attorney General, it would be the Deputy Attorney General, someone from Washington would go and cheer their success, and do some press on it and open the center.
Wonderful. So without getting too specific, so were there any programs that you would have liked to have seen modified, or perhaps maybe there was a program that you didn't think was as effective as you would have liked it to be?
I think what bothered me, if I had to lose sleep over those couple years, the government, the bureaucracy is so big. And when you're giving out, tens of millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars, there are definitely safeguards in place, processes, channels, peer review, all sorts of very strict application, procedures to go through.
And basically what you're saying, there's really no wiggle room. Like,
Very-
there are the rules, and
Here are
that's
the
it.
rules, here are the problem, in my opinion, was Washington just didn't have, wrongly or rightly, the manpower, once the money was given out, to then go and oversee or check in. And we all know, if you're going to, ideally, if you're going to give taxpayer money and you have, okay, you've got $5 million, you're going to do these 5 things, I will check in with you, did you do number 1, number 2? There has to be oversight for accountability to happen. And there was a statistic at the time, it probably hasn't changed. We were able, many offices, probably most offices, able to conduct oversight on about 10% of our grantees.
Okay.
And that would be a little unfortunate. That would cause me at times to be concerned.
And I want to follow up on that because this is sort of what you're alluding to. What were some of the common themes that women's groups and community groups across the country would share with you? Was it really, we get the money from Washington, but then there's not additional support? I mean, was that a problem? Or can you elaborate on perhaps some other issues that were common themes that you would hear from a group in California, from Kansas, from New Hampshire? Kind of what did they think could have been improved?
I think in the issue, it's tough. With the issue of domestic violence and sexual assault, there are many champions who really fought tooth and nail to make sure that the Violence Against Women Act was enacted. Probably the majority of folks like that are not real strong Republicans. So in that field, what we found, there sometimes serving or aiding the survivor might not always be at the forefront of the mission.
I see.
Because they're now running very large organizations with big budgets, staff. It's always tempting to get a little political. And all of that kind of takes you away from the work,
The mission.
and the mission
Right.
of helping survivors. So we tried, within the very strict parameters, when there was a new sort of way or a smaller group that was, well thought of, good reviews, all of this, but hadn't gotten a grant from the U.S. government, we tried to encourage new applicants to try and share new ideas, new ways of doing things. So whenever we would have any sort of flexibility, we would try to invite some of these newcomers to the table. And my big thing, some of my staff were probably not thrilled to hear it, but it would anger me tremendously when I would hear that someone got another $2 million grant, and now we're in the next cycle, and they hadn't spent that money, and they're asking for more. And so to me, that was something, it's like, wait. We're there to get the money out to those in the field. We're not there to stockpile.
Right.
We're not there to use taxpayer money to build a big fiefdom, in whatever state you might be in. That needs to get on the ground. We need to get it to the shelters. We need to get it to, the therapists, the doctors, the law enforcement who have that great new community program, and they need, $15,000. Why can't we get that to them?
Right.
So, yeah.
Okay, so following on that, where do you think the opportunities are for more engagement with women at the community level on these issues? Is it making sure that new groups are able to participate in the grant-making process and have opportunities to get these type of funds? Is it, or is it something else? Where do you think those opportunities for more engaging these groups doing this type of work at the community level?
Well, I'm going to pivot, if I can, away from justice, because I always feel like with Department of Justice, you have to talk very particularly about that, and I don't want to do that, when it comes to your question. As far as, I'm going to go back to political days, I think having worked on women's engagement, at the RNC for a couple of years and working through Bush-Cheney 04, we did the W stands for women effort. I think today you still hear it. We're the majority of the population.
We make all the household consumer decisions. We talk about that. Why I came up with this theme is because women make the majority of the consumer decisions, the healthcare decisions, the educational decisions. They're a big player in the household, for lack of a better term.
And we would say it, my former boss would say it all the time. All issues are women's issues. I think we're well past a day when women's issues meant, reproductive rights. Poll after poll, whether it was 2002, 2014, 2016, just last year, those sort of issues don't come up in the top three. When you poll women, it's terrorism, it's money, it's healthcare, it's education, it's all of that. And so really, to me, that hasn't changed over the last, 15, 20 years. Women were the majority of the population. We make huge amount of daily decisions. So to treat women like a small minority outreach group that you're trying to talk to with special language, I don't think that's been effective. What we would, from the political lens, women listen a lot of the times to other women. When you're putting women on TV, if you're talking about reproductive rights, if you're talking about the child tax credit right now, politically, we would try to get women talking about that, because as we've heard over the years, women will say, why am I going to listen, to the older white gentleman, tell me about raising children, but if you put on the soccer mom, in the Bush days we call them the security moms, it's like, wait a minute, Cherylyn and I, she sounds like a friend of mine, or she's someone I talk to on the sidelines or at work or at Starbucks or whatever. I might listen to her. But has the Republican Party, are we equal right now? Do we have as many women representing, women around the country? No, we've got a lot of work to do. So, for me, I think that work, there's a long road ahead in identifying women, equipping them to run. And another thing, I just have to say, we hear a lot of, so many women, will say, well, no one asked me to run. I didn't think I could run. How do you run for mayor, for council member,
school
let
board
alone
member,
school board, governor? And so I think parties on both sides, I think the Democrats have done a better job of building a bench team of women
and
to
minorities.
Run. And minorities. I really, I agree. And so I feel like that is huge untapped potential that every election cycle we hear, we got to get more women involved. Yeah, we do. And we've got to outreach to them and equip them.
But, that's kind of one of my pet peeves, is that we talk about this every 2 years and 4 years at election time, but the question is, what are we doing in between? You have to build the farm team, but you got to start building the farm team in the off-election years. And just as a reminder for those who may have come in late and missed my introduction of Andrea Bottner, In addition to heading up the Women's Office, Women's Bureau at the State Department, she ran the Violence Against Women's Office at the Department of Justice during the George W. Bush years, and she also worked with co-chair Ann Wagner at the Republican National Committee in women's engagement. So I want to spend a little bit more time on your time at the RNC and really back to this whole issue of, you know, how do we get women to run for office? How does the party engage more women? I mean, where are the opportunities, again, at the local level, school board, dog catcher, sheriff even? What else could we be doing in these off-election years?
Well,
and you, maybe you could talk about some of the initiatives that you led and helped champion at the RNC to help engage more women.
Well, we were so fortunate when I came into the RNC. We had been scouting, you know, looking in the states, the laboratories, you know, what's going on in the 50 states, you know, where could we look to build a bench? And there was, at the time, Senator Richard Lugar, who is no longer in the Senate, but Richard Lugar of Indiana, had been approached by a very dynamic group of women who said, we want to do kind of a candidate training school for women, Republican women. We want to basically teach them fundraising, communication skills, how to run for school board, how to run for whatever, just how to speak their mind, be more polished, raise some money, and be confident, you know, in going into the public arena. And so Senator Lugar said, okay, all right, you know, it's going to be the Lugar Excellence in Public Service Series. So by the time '02 came, I had gotten to meet the founder of the series, a wonderful woman by the name of Judy Singleton, who was still very much involved in Indiana running this. And we thought, okay, here's a good idea. It's working tremendously well in Indiana. How do we replicate it? And so that really was Congresswoman Wagner and my main mission, kind of like the pilot project at the Department of Justice. To me, that was the main piece, you know, of the job. The everyday goal was, we've got a good idea, let's build Lugar series in the different states. And so that's what we did for those couple years. We were able to expand, and you know, for instance, we would go into California, state that is very different than Indiana. But you go in with kind of the kernel, you know, the idea and the mission of, we want to identify Republican women, we want to educate, equip, train them. It's not to us what they believe. We're not going to touch, you know, the reproductive rights debate. If they're Republican women and they're looking to seek office, let's do it. Let's help them. But it is not up to us, you know, to develop their political opinions.
Yeah, they need to develop that. They need to come up with their stump speech themselves, because it really needs to be from the heart. It can't be manufactured by you, or us.
So that was something we would go in. And, you know, it's like anything else, like the Family Justice Center. Every community is so different. And so, you know, you have to go in with a strong mission, but then I would say the biggest lesson was what works in California, what works in the tribal community of Sitka, Alaska, is very different than what is going to work in downtown St. Louis. And what that community will define as success, they get to define that as success. You know, that. So, you know, with these service series, I don't know right now. I don't think the RNC is still engaging, you know, in that active sort of effort with that particular series. There's always, as you know, candidate training underway. But
all across the country. I think at grassroots, various, I think on both sides of the aisle.
Absolutely.
In fact, not think, for sure, on both sides of the aisle, they have nonprofit groups, they have grassroots groups. Everyone is always doing candidate training. And the one thing that I think is necessary in California, in Alaska, here in Kansas, is that you need to raise money. Let's talk for a minute about that, because nobody likes to raise money. No one wants to ask a perfect stranger for money. No one does.
And well, maybe the one or two people who do, they make a lot of money.
Right.
And they're immediately hired by candidates.
Exactly.
Like, you are a shark.
Yeah.
Go just make money for me.
Right, exactly. But candidates in general, and I think women, I mean, this is just another, perhaps, for lack of a better term, impediment to some women running. How do they get around that? Because again, in Alaska, here, New Hampshire, you got to raise money.
Yeah.
And it's getting awful expensive. And we're going to take the exception to the 2016 campaign because that, of course, was a whole different, you know, I think Trump ran a completely different campaign. But previous to that, and I think most people who are not Trump and don't have that sort of platform and following and money, personal money, are going to have to go and ask people, perfect strangers, for money. How, you know, how did you guys deal with that when you were trying to recruit candidates and encourage women to run? How did you kind of help them overcome that hurdle?
I mean, it's, I hate to say it, that was part of, you know, in this particular training program, it was kind of retraining or making the case to the candidate, if you believe in what you want to do, if you want to hold office, this is not a negotiable part of the job. You have to have that confidence that you will deliver good for the people that you're looking to represent. And the way you deliver good is by grabbing that office. And so, I mean, I hate to say it, but yes, there are those in office who hate the fundraising piece, and some it comes more naturally to. But
it's a necessary
if you
evil.
want to run, it may not be your favorite thing, but it is something, unfortunately, that you need to focus on quite a bit.
Right.
And I think nowadays, a lot of people...
More so.
They are constantly, you know, that's something that is always on everyone's mind. Is big donor, small donor, you know, paying the fundraisers to do it for you. That all is this just insatiable.
Yeah. I mean, I think the sense of, at least what I get from people who do this for a living, is that they'll come up with the list, but the candidate is going to have to make that ask. So I think that's got to be it is a obstacle you're just going to have to overcome, because no one is going to make the call for you.
No.
I mean, essentially.
And really, you know, you hate to say it when it's, I don't want to belittle, you know, a $5 donation.
They're important too.
They're important too. You know, that is a little probably more easily done, you know, at arm's length, because it's email, it's mass mailing, it's, you know, robocalls or whatever it is. But out of respect for the donor, if you're going to ask someone for thousands of dollars,
that should be a phone call.
You owe the person a phone call.
Yeah.
And then the follow-up too.
Right,
and
exactly.
That is something that staff
you.
helps with. Yeah, the thank you and the, you know, the join us on this trip. I'm so grateful. I mean, that's...
Yeah. Let's talk for a minute about how fundraising has even changed since you were at the RNC. Because now we have social media, we have Facebook, we have all these different mediums. So do you think, Andy, is that helping? Is that adding just one more step of things to do? I mean, are candidates really bringing in money online? What's your sense of that?
Gosh, I'm probably the least technologically advanced. I hate to, probably not the right person to ask, but I think, yes, technology really helps with quick, small, sometimes cause or emergency-related donations. You can't beat that.
Right.
You know, in the way that candidates and office holders can directly touch people, you know, you know, get those messages, ask for money, good. But I also think the other side of it is that unceasing scrutiny, you know, and I wonder, I think a lot of office holders today would say, yeah, the technology helps me raise money or function efficiently, but at the same time, if I'm overheard at the restaurant, you know, saying something to my college roommate, well, someone just picked it up on the phone, or that picture, or that, you know. it's really just nonstop scrutiny
Right.
that anybody, I think, in the public arena deals with now, as we all saw many times in,
Right.
in last year's
Right.
election.
Right. Let's talk about sort of the current efforts. You're involved in Right Now PAC. Tell us a little bit about that and your efforts to raise money for women candidates, recruiting.
My Right Now Women's PAC has been around for, gosh, probably since the early 90s. In their group, they've kind of evolved through the years. Recently, they transitioned to a PAC formation. They used to do, they still will do some events, but their main goal is to basically raise money and then offer checks to women candidates, women who have a high chance of success. Because they're a small organization,
Right.
and so they are not in the position to just be
Right.
handing out money, to anybody who is looking to run.
And tell our audience what levels. Is this for federal office, congressional, for Senate?
Yes,
What?
that it would be for federal
Okay.
office. Yes, so
Okay.
the people that we're helping would be congresswomen and senators. And it's a great organization to be involved with. There's a lot of women. I'd say about 15. Cherylyn, you know the group well, and a friend of the group. There are about 15 women in D.C. Many of us know each other socially, professionally, have been around for a while, which is great because then when you're around town, you start to develop friendships even with some members of Congress, a lot of these female legislators. So it's a lot of camaraderie, but it also makes you feel like you're supporting women who are there, who need to stay in office, and then, also looking for those who are looking for that leg up, who have got a good shot.
And do you think, Andy, there are a multitude of PACs that do that? What Right Now does? Is this rare? Tell us.
Yeah,
Tell the audience kind of.
Right Now
the
is
state of
more of
play
a
is.
small PAC. There's another very large. There are many PACs. There's another group, the View PAC, Value in Electing Women. Their PAC is, I would say, larger, and they're known for. They may do some very frequent events and ways to interact with congresswomen, but perhaps in a smaller setting for a higher dollar amount. Right Now is more. They really want to focus on engaging women under 40 and even under 30, to be a part of it. And so they'll do a lot of events, but they'll invite young Hill staffers.
And they're lower dollar.
Lower dollar.
So that's the difference.
Exactly.
Your PAC is really trying to engage women, younger women.
Yes.
Whereas the more high dollar PACs are obviously going to get a whole other different set of women.
Exactly right.
Right?
Exactly
And the whole
right.
idea is if you want to engage younger women, you kind of have to provide opportunities for them to come and meet other female candidates, right? Because
That's
again,
right.
it's about growing the list of candidates and also encouraging the younger women to perhaps run for office.
That's absolutely right. And also, then those younger women, when I think back to, 2002 when I was at the RNC, and the founder of Right Now is a woman, wonderful woman named Marlene Colucci. And she, the PAC was growing, the group was growing, and we were talking about what can we do, at the 04 convention, what kind of event could we do that will give buzz to the group, invite younger women, raise some money. And we did this event with our excellence in public service. Our Indiana women came. And, to mix women like that, the younger women, the women who are looking to run for office, but everybody was kind of a novice, and those relationships and connections now, 13 years later, are still there.
Yeah.
And those younger women are really the ones who are running our monthly meetings.
Exactly.
And managing the work every day.
I know we're almost out of time before we start Q&A, but just one last. So if you could say perhaps the top 3 things that both parties could do in general to engage more women, because we know that every woman every issue is a woman's issue, what do you think perhaps top 1, 2 issues would be?
You mean issues to discuss? Or
Yeah,
what?
things that they could do to engage more women.
You know, I would think either party needs
Or
to.
issues too,
Yeah.
however you want.
Either party, you need to go where women are. You need to be looking
Right.
at that school board, neighborhood association level. Now, either party, there's not always, they don't have, you know, the staff. People aren't going to be combing neighborhoods
Right.
and checking
Right.
in. But it really is, in a way, about building a network. You need to be looking for those women. When they're identified, when you hear of those women, it's how then, now that they're identified, can we communicate?
Can we groom
and
them?
help them
Right?
and groom them and give them opportunities.
Right.
You know, because
It is about opportunities, isn't it?
well, and it's about sometimes, you know, talking to someone saying, you go to the neighborhood association meeting, and when you stand up, you know, you talk so well and people listen to you. Have you thought of running for office? You know, and sometimes if you're a woman who's gone a little further along that line, getting a little older, and you've been around a little bit politically and professionally, you know, look down, mentor, compliment, engage with that younger woman, that college student, the junior associate in the office.
Right.
You know, it's that sort of sharing
Right.
of experience, I think, too, that can be done.
Yeah.
That is done by both sides.
Right.
You know, but again, women will say that all the time when parties go out and do the official polling. You know, they'll say, well, you could run, why didn't you? And
No one asked me.
no one asked me. I don't know how to run for mayor. Or even, where do I look
Right.
to run for mayor? You know,
Where
sometimes
will my
just-
support come from? How will I
Yeah.
raise money? It's
Yeah.
the
Yeah. Sometimes even both of our DNC, RNC web pages could have like a separate section.
Right.
You know, interested in running for office, click here. Here's a toolkit.
Right.
Or here 5, you know, answer these 5 questions.
Right.
You know, if you don't answer yes to all 5, forget it. You have no,
Right.
it's not going to be
Right,
good.
right.
But you know,
Right.
that kind of, how could I get over that first barrier? It is, I truly, both sides of the aisle, you just have to really commend those who serve.
Right.
And I think we all know nowadays,
Takes
so
courage.
much
Takes courage.
more courage is needed. Because it's gotten personal, it's gotten nasty, it's gotten invasive, you know, all of that.
Right.
And so, my goodness, you know.
Let's praise them, really.
Yeah, you
because
really do.
I think it takes courage. And
It does.
it's, I think all of these candidates, whether they win or lose or are successful at any particular level, it's a lot of, it's sacrifice.
It is. It is. And when they do it, and then they even give back, like Elizabeth Dole. Remember years back when she was doing in the Senate, she was running the women's leadership, raising money for women's candidates at the NRSC. You know, it's women like Elizabeth Dole that say, "All right, I'm here."
And they were the trailblazers.
They were the
right?
trailblazers.
The true trailblazers. I think that's a good place to end. And then start our Q&As. Who's got the first? There you go. Thank you. Here comes the mic.
Okay, so the liberation of women began when they, first of all, when they got the right to vote, when they could control the size of their families, so they could go out to get a job and become independent, right? Why is it that we're allowing men to make our decisions about the size of our families? Why do men still control that issue? Don't you think women should have gotten the lesson by now that they shouldn't allow that to happen? Melinda Gates of Microsoft fame wrote that in one of the countries in Africa, a woman will walk 10 miles to get contraceptive help. And our men control the decision in this country, and they said, we cannot help those people. That is just disgusting, don't you think, even though you're Republican?
I love that.
Even though.
No, I can certainly understand your point. I think with the issue of reproductive rights, as far as I'm concerned, that's a personal issue that a woman makes within her family or just, for herself. And that is not an issue that I would want to be involved in legislating.
And that's the trouble. We don't want to be involved in it.
Yeah, I mean, right now, the state of, if we're going to, I think there are many considerations, with things like contraceptives. It's a matter of, does the right to contraception infringe on someone else's religious belief? And in what context are we talking about this? Whether it's taxpayer funded, non-taxpayer funded. So I think there are many different considerations, and I can certainly understand your point. Those who want contraception in a place like Africa and they're walking 10 miles to get it, I can certainly understand how without it they don't have control over the size of their families. It's a different situation in this country, but I could see the frustration stemming from one place to the next, in your opinion.
And let me just add, I think there are a number of vocal female members of Congress in the Senate and the House that are making sure that men are not the sole individuals and members making those decisions for women. I think there are enough, I think there's a critical mass of women, would you say? Would you agree?
Yeah.
In the House, not so much in the Senate, but certainly in the House, that are caucusing together and are trying to come up with reasonable solutions and policies on this issue.
And it really, to your point, it just underscores we need more women.
Exactly. That's the
regardless
whole point.
of their
Yeah.
opinion. Now, there might be
Of
some
their
who
political
hold
affiliation,
opinions
right.
who you might not agree with their opinion on that issue, but we need more women there because regardless of their opinion, they're in that realm.
Yeah, and they're the ones having the
dealing with that
babies.
issue.
And they're the ones having the babies, so, again, another reason why we need to encourage women to run for office.
Yeah.
It's where we are.
Thank you for the question.
Thank you.
I'd like to ask real quick about what you think the legacy of the International Women of Courage Award has been. Last semester, I had the good fortune of working at the State Department, and I got to attend the 2017 Women of Courage Award with P and the First Lady just bringing in all the people from, I think it was 20 different countries this year. So I was wondering, outside of what is already an awesome award ceremony where everyone comes in, we get to recognize great things going on, what is the impact of that program? How does that help the people that are honored forward their missions across the globe?
Well, I think it's every year, at least a couple of years when we started it, it kind of can change. The first year we did it, it was Secretary Rice. We were at the State Department. The second year we did it, we were at the White House with President and Mrs. Bush, and the crowd was 3 times as big. I know Mrs. Obama was always, I think, probably 6 out of 8 times or something. She was there, during the 8 years of the Obama administration. I'm not sure if the president was. He probably was. I'm sure they probably had him at one. Going forward now with President Trump and Secretary Tillerson, I know this past year they did something at the State Department. I would hope then next year it's a White House sort of ceremony so that the level of awareness, the level of importance continues to stay at the highest level. As far as the impact, I think that's an open question. There is ability at the State Department to enhance that program financially, depending on where they want to be in the different countries. they could look to say, we're going to continue to choose people from different countries and not repeat, or they could make a political/policy decision to say, okay, this issue that this woman championed in that country, there's real opportunity there to create a center, an institute, a training program, whatever it might be for that particular country. We could put foreign assistance, into that country under the umbrella of the International Women of Courage Award. And that was kind of the thinking. We weren't saying, it has to be these industries or these sectors. It was very much women of courage from the educational, from military, judicial, legal, any sort of background. We wanted a variety of people, and I think over the years we've gotten a very diverse group of celebrants. I'm glad you had the chance to. Do you want to go back? Yeah. You think you'd want to go into the Foreign Service? Okay. Very exciting lifestyle, lots of good opportunity.
Are women at a disadvantage raising money for races, political races?
That's a good question.
Yeah, I would say many women would say yes, they are, and I think there's some legitimacy to that. I think I am not one that I don't think you get anywhere by buying into the women as victim mentality, but I think it's also very wise to look at the world as it is, and is there still a bit of a boys' network, whether it's on the golf course or other areas? Of course there is.
Would women thereby benefit from public financing campaigns?
There would be some that would say yes. I would say that could be a possibility, but I think there are also women who could benefit from other very able women giving to their campaigns.
Right.
I think we've got a lot of women.
We've got a lot of very wealthy female CEOs, accomplished women that could write checks to other women. So it's the kind of supporting, it's that fellow support.
And even, women, it's funny, I have met women donors who will say, oh, I gave such and such a check to Congressman so-and-so, but not to
Congresswoman so-and-so.
And you say, well, why? But, come on, help another woman out. She's your people. She believes everything you believe. And unfortunately, the business sense, that donor will say, yeah, but she doesn't have nearly as good a shot at winning. There are not as many of them. Her race is a farther long shot than Congressman or Senator so-and-so. And it's like, okay.
Here we are,
well,
back to square one.
To the, got to keep chipping away. More women to run, more women to support those running.
Kind of back to the chicken and egg. There we go. I'm loyal.
As a federal appointee, how did you balance the work between the administrative tasks of your position and the direct action and impact that you could have?
Well, that someone said to me before I went into the Department of Justice, another political, who you may or may not know, but they said, look, you've got short time. Any appointee has very short time. What is the one thing, the project, the thing that has to get done for the administration? Focus 90% of your time on that. That's the only thing really, because as a political, I would be the only one in that office that would, work on that particular presidential project. All the other stuff is what many people will get dragged down with, and so you have to go in saying, my mission is to do this, but whether it's a deputy, whether it's a special assistant, you have to make sure the work, the daily oversight, leadership of the office is delegated and being done. And you know what? For me, the offices I worked in, the Department of Justice was a far bigger one. There were many different deputies at state. It was myself and my dear beloved friend who was a deputy. It was a smaller office. And so we had our lines, our different areas of work, but you want to foster, I did, a team mentality. we're all in it together, whether we politically agreed all the time or not,
Yeah.
You get more done if you can get everybody kind of buying into the same thing. It's, when that award was created and approved, the Foreign Service officers who never in their life would have voted for George W. Bush, they were happier than anybody else, because it was good for the department.
Right.
It was good for women, and you needed that sort of buy-in.
I saw someone else's hand up. Thank you for coming, ladies.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you again for coming. I just want to say, in my brief 18 years of life, it's kind of been, when we're talking about women's issues in particular, there's always women at the forefront of these issues, obviously, and for good reason. And I'm just wondering, from a male standpoint, how can males, not only in this room, but also nationwide, get involved in women's issues and promote them without kind of infringing on what they're trying to accomplish, and what can we do as a society of males in order to forward the mission that women's rights are trying to
Great
achieve?
question.
That's a good question.
Yeah. I feel like I could answer that on like so many different levels,
Yeah.
I would say first starting with yourself, just, be a good friend, be a fair partner, be a good friend, a fair partner, a good son, brother, it really starts kind of with you in the way that you're going to look to treat women. As far as organizational involvement, I am working with a group right now. It's called the Independent Women's Forum, and their tagline is, "We love men." We're not, we love men, and they always have men at, their events and donating to their cause and going to the galas and, and they always honor, along with the Woman of Valor, they do a Gentleman of Distinction, because they want to foster, they're men and women, and men, often I think you hear from women, men can be the best champions for women in business and politics, as a colleague. I know I think back over my life, I've got a couple role models who were not the women bosses or the women colleagues, but the men.
Right.
And so don't be afraid to be that person or give that assistance.
Yeah.
And and then I would say on a personal note, I have a young son, and a lot of times it starts at home as well. Respecting women and honoring women. Women are just as smart, just as capable, just as able to get the job done. But yeah, there are differences between the sexes. That's okay. Thanks for the
your
question.
Yeah.
Round
Thank
two.
Yeah.
So this one is about your work regarding women in campaigns, which you mentioned towards the end. I was just wondering, you mentioned the oft-cited attitudinal barrier for women considering campaigning, which is that men are just more willing to stumble and experiment their way into a campaign, into success. I was going to ask, what is the institutional or the structural side of those barriers as well? Why can't women enter campaigns even if they think they can, or even if they've been asked to by a party?
You mean, why can't they? What would stop them?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think with that, I think to your point, anybody could run. A woman could choose to do that. I think the obstacle is often from the woman herself. And I think just realistically, a lot of women would say, okay, that's a lot of time I'd need to commit. What's going to happen to the family? What's going to happen?
Who's going to do pickup? Who's going to make sure
pickup?
dinner's on the table?
What's
Who's going to
the
review
husband
homework?
or the partner
Right.
going to say?
Right.
Just a lot, I hate to say more balancing, but in all reality, I think when women are at a certain point in life, there are a lot of other
Logistics.
things that are competing for time and logistics. Then, if you're a woman and you're watching someone like a Hillary Clinton run, Carly Fiorina, be on stage, I think there is still heightened scrutiny, fairly or unfairly, that women, you have to get over. I mean, it's not going to disappear.
Right.
So really, the obstacle, I think, is starting with the woman herself. Can she make it work?
Right.
Does she have the guts to do it? Can she make it work for herself? And then does she have that family, that
Right.
team behind her? You know, most women I know wouldn't jump off the cliff to do something
Right.
like that unless they knew that their kid wasn't going to be left on the field.
Right. And
They'd
often,
make it to the doctor appointments.
right, and I think often, to Andy's point, you see women wait until their children are older, till they run, right? Because it's just easier when you don't have little ones. And for those women that, in Congress, House and Senate, and I think just really at any level, particularly the ones, I think, in Congress with those late night votes and, you know, do you move your family to Washington or not? I mean, it's an unbelievable amount of juggling that they do.
Yeah.
I think of Kathy McMorris Rogers, who has 3 little ones, and Mary Landrieu, who was in the Senate with, when her first elected, when her children were small. I mean, they generally have to move the kids to Washington, and then they're going to have to be commuting back to their districts on the weekend. I mean, it's just, it's really remarkable what these parents, and also the men, but the men tend to have the wives that can either be back home in the states and districts, but I think it's very hard on all of them, on their families.
Yeah.
Really. It's just a tremendous strain, I think.
Yeah. At the State Department, there would always be Foreign Service officers, you know, and whatever trip, you know, wherever we'd be going, there would be a Foreign Service officer that would be an escort. And so I loved it. The few times there would be a woman Foreign Service officer. And I think I was in Colombia. It was a woman, probably about my age. This is, 10 years ago. And I said, how is it living here? And she had 2 kids. And she said, oh, it's so tough, because the family, we brought everybody here. My husband's working on Wall Street, but remotely, calling. I'm like, how in the world did you do that? She goes, yeah, it's tough. She goes, most of my colleagues are Foreign Service officers who are men, and they have wives. And so if you ask them how is it tough, they're like, no. As soon as you set up the house and the kids and, this and that. She goes, yeah, no, I'm that person. And I can, like, see her face in my mind, But it's a lot of, I think it's a personal decision. There are women who do it, like Kathy McMorris Rogers and others, so ably. But, don't fool yourself. You've got to know what you're getting into. It's going to be a lot of juggling, and hopefully it works well for the family. Oh, can I? I'm sorry.
No.
So you had mentioned that protecting victims can sometimes be seen as somewhat of a partisan issue, which I had never really thought of as one, but I was a bit unsettled when we had a woman help with repealing some of the guidelines to protect women from sexual assault on college campuses. And I was wondering if you think that within the Republican Party there's a split or more consensus in the view of violence against women, if there's a general consensus on that issue, and then just more generally, if there are different issues or even just rhetorical strategies that the party uses that might be isolating to women.
No, I don't think there is definite in the Republican Party, and frankly, I would say in the Democrat Party as well. I think just, among people, men and women, there are very different ways of looking at domestic violence issues. I mean, I have had women in Manhattan say to me, hey, it's the woman's fault. Why doesn't she leave? And these are women that are, I would say, very self-identified as, feminists, and I have no time for this. The woman needs to leave. It's all her fault. She chooses to stay. There have been Republican men who have said the same thing. I think you really have to delve more into that issue and recognize that the more you know about the issue, it is not always so easy to just leave. It often, the survivor, the victim, is isolated. She might not have access anymore to any sort of finances to get a bus ticket to leave because her abuser has, created that environment. Psychologically, she doesn't think she has the freedom. There are children involved. She's thinking, how do I get out of here if I have no money, and do I take them out of school? He's going to find me. They are always in the most danger the first 2 days or so after they've left, because oftentimes they make that choice to run, and they're often found. And then there's a lot of retribution to be paid. So I really don't look at it at all as a party issue. I really don't. I feel like even among men and women, like I said, I've had women that my jaw's dropped because, in my opinion, there's been like a lack of empathy or compassion there. And so I wouldn't even want to address it like a political party sort of issue. Each party has many other issues, I'm sure, that they could address and respond to differently. But with this, that issue, I think, is another reason why it's uncomfortable for a lot of people, because there are such different viewpoints around it, and a lot of a lack of understanding, at times. And with something like Title IX, I don't want to delve too closely into that, but some would say it's a real legal issue. It's about the burden of guilt being proven, and it's really more of a legal issue, not necessarily taking safety from a victim or a survivor. But it's a complicated issue, and it is Domestic Violence Awareness Month.
Yes, it is.
And I should say this, if anybody ever needs help, there's always that 1-800 number, 799-SAFE, the National Domestic Violence Hotline. Can be accessed via that number, and there's an online hotline too in the last 10 or 12 years. So you probably, on campus here, I would hope, you probably have flyers up or cards. I feel like when I've been on campus in the girls' bathroom sometimes, in the men's room, I've heard they've been distributed as well. Place where you could go for help or send a friend for help.
And time for one more question, and you had your hand up.
I've been to several of these over the last year, and a lot of the people that were here have told us how their departments are not staffed well under this administration. And we've heard this over and over again, and they're saying, I don't know how they're getting things done, because having a full staff is very important. You are no longer there. Do you know how? I mean, this is a great concern to all of us is women's issues and what you've been working towards. Do you feel that this will be something that will be cut back because of understaffing? Do you feel that maybe that's a problem in the department that you were in?
No, I don't. I think there is a concern as far as staffing in general, for sure. For sure. I mean, there are more vacancies right now with this administration, but I think for many different reasons. As far as mild office at state, I will say this. Under President Obama, when Secretary Clinton came in, she immediately elevated the office to ambassador level. So I know mild office the last 8 years is in very good shape financially and right down the hall from the secretary's office. There might be a little envy there at times, but they're in very good shape. I do know people over there now at state. It will probably not stay there, on the secretary's hall, because that really is about how you would, what the administration wants to prioritize right off the bat. So it's not saying that they wouldn't prioritize women's issues, but I think someone like Secretary Clinton, that was something she knew she was going to do the minute she came in. With this administration, I think there will be probably a rejiggering of focus, but I would not accuse them of not being supportive of women's engagement. I think we'll see a lot of that, and I've seen a bit of that in the small business community, the entrepreneurial zone. I was at a meeting with Ms. Ivanka Trump, I guess it was last Monday, she spoke at length about women in STEM education. You're going to see them looking at women in business, infrastructure. They want to get back to that, rebuilding a lot of the nation's infrastructure. How do women-owned companies come into it?
There's a lot of focus, too, on disaster response. I served at SBA during Bush years, so, and back to State Department, I just think because of the geopolitical situation, their focus is on Iran and North Korea and China and Japan. So I just think that's just the priorities, you know? Not that they are not focused on women's issues at all. I just think what's on their plate right now is dealing with infrastructure in Puerto Rico and Texas and Florida, and now, of course, the daily geopolitical issues.
Yeah.
Thank you for your question. So this brings us to an end, and I want to thank everyone for being here. Thank you, Andrea Bottner.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Just a preview, we have a break next week, so I know you guys are going to enjoy going on vacation or going home to see your lovely families. And our community guests are, I would love for you all to join us the following week. On the 24th, we have Ashley Davis, who also served in the W administration, helped start DHS. She's a founder of a lobbyist firm, and she's a mountain climber. She climbed Mount Kilimanjaro this past year. So I really hope that you all come back for the 24th to see us. Thank you again for coming.
Thank you. Are we off? You come.